What does it mean to ask good questions?
That's a good question. I would say it means to choose to see functionally, for the purpose of this conversation, it means to choose to see life, leadership, and even relationship through the lens of opportunity, creativity, and curiosity. So the person that doesn't ask any questions is the person that believes the way that it is the way that it always will be. The person that asks great questions is the person that believes things can be different, things can change, things can shift. And that in itself is a creative posture that really highlights the value and power of questioning everything.
Why is it an important skill for the people listening, for leaders?
It's a principle that the quality of your results never exceeds the quality of your questions. That sounds like a pithy phrase until you actually reckon with it and practice it. And then you start to realize, oh, this is really, really true. To the point where I could tell you genuinely, every good thing in my life right now that I played a role in intentionally creating, that I didn't just stumble into, but I played a role in intentionally creating, upstream from that is always a question. I actually believe that. And so the good things in our life that we get to participate in intentionally creating always come on the back end. Sometimes it's one day, sometimes it's 1 year, but they always come on the back end of really, really solid, well-formulated, thoughtful, creative, imaginative, profound questions.
So yeah, what is the purpose of this episode? What are we trying to communicate? Can you just elaborate on that a little bit?
I want to go a little bit deeper than the shallow way that we often think about questions, right? The shallow way that we often think about asking good questions is like, oh, well, that's what you're supposed to do on your first date. And that's what you're supposed to do whenever you meet someone or whenever you're in an Uber ride or something like that, is you're just supposed to ask good questions. And that is an arena for asking questions, is just sheer curiosity and just getting to know someone or just creating conversation or something like that. That is one arena for asking questions. But for leaders, what I want us to remember is that questions are not just an area for getting information or for learning. Questions are also an incredible tool. And that tool has different uses and different aims that are going to formulate the questions that we ask. And so in particular, the way I wanted us to frame this episode is, let's talk about 3 arenas where questions can be a really helpful way to challenge ourselves and others. And then what I wanted to do is just share 5 questions that have been life-changing for me. And that sounds really cliche to say life-changing, but like I'm saying it in the very like actual way of like, these questions actually changed my life, like legitimately. And so I want to share those 5 questions with the people listening.
What's the first arena that we can ask questions and that you think questions are a valuable tool to use?
Reflection. And anytime I hear the word reflection, I think of, I don't know who originally said the quote, but it says that there's not wisdom in experience, there's wisdom in evaluated experience. And then let's pair that with the Tim Keller definition of wisdom, which is wisdom is competence with regard to the realities of life. So when we think about the fact that wisdom, competence with regard to the realities of life, comes when we evaluate our experience, when we say, hey, that happened, how did that go? Well, then what we immediately recognize is, how do we evaluate our experience? We ask questions. And one of the things that I often see is that if I'm not careful, if I'm moving too fast, if I'm not being reflective, the mistakes that I make don't turn into lessons. The successes that I have don't turn into additional successes, and the good things in my life don't get reproduced in the life of others. And it wasn't because they couldn't, it's because they didn't. And the reason why they didn't is because I didn't take the time to reflect. And what I'm really saying there is I didn't take the time to ask the proper questions on the back end of what I experienced. And therefore I didn't get all the wisdom that was hidden within what I did. And so that just hits on the value and power of questions as being a tool for reflection.
You've mentioned this multiple times before, but there's three types of mistakes, and it's good mistakes are ones that others make that you can learn from. Bad mistakes are ones that you make that you can learn from. Tragic mistakes are ones that you make that you don't learn from. And the difference between a bad mistake and a tragic mistake really is just questions. Like, did you ask questions?
That's exactly right. I mean, so often when I do something horribly wrong, right? When I do something that just like completely went off the rails, the first question I ask myself then in reflection is, what was I thinking? Right? And how many of us can relate to that, right? I see people raising their hands on their run right now saying, that's me. I asked myself the question, what was I thinking? And my answer to that evaluative reflection question is, I wasn't, right? So because I didn't practice proper reflection earlier, I'm the reflection that I'm now practicing is, what was I thinking? And what we can do there is we can say, well, there are certain times where thinking is a good thing to do, that I should create a rhythm for thinking, right? And what's going to occur in that thinking? It's going to be great questions, right? Our questions guide our thinking, and our thinking guides our life. So this is why practically when we hear and see so much content right now on the value and power of journaling, what are people doing whenever they're journaling? They're answering questions, whether they know it or not. And it might not be overtly written questions, but people, when they are journaling, are always answering questions. And if people ever tell you my journaling or prayer life is dull, or I don't even know where to start, or I'm hitting a wall, what they're really saying is, I can't answer because I don't have the right questions. The minute you get a good question, the minute you start to have the right answers.
What's the next arena that you can ask questions in?
Leadership development. So the first one was reflection. It's looking back on our own experience, or our team's experience, and saying, how'd that go? The second is leadership development. And this is actually something that we teach every single coach that we train to coach business leaders for us at Path for Growth. It's one of the 5 coaching qualities, that is curiosity. And the principle that we orient our entire curiosity training around is, good leaders give answers to people. Great leaders extract answers from people. Here's what we often think. We think that when people are coming to us with a problem that they're facing, a challenge that they're encountering, a decision that needs to be made, the thing that we think is, most people, most of the time when they do that, they're coming to us for answers. In reality, what most people are actually coming to you for is confidence. They're not coming to you for answers. But think about that distinction for a second. If someone is coming to you and the language that they have is, hey, I'm facing this challenge, or I'm facing this issue, or I need to make this decision, can you help me? And you give them an answer. They need confidence, but you give them an answer. What do? You actually cut them off at the knees for the very thing that they need, because you teach them, you can't do that. I've got this. I'm the superhero in this relationship. What do great leaders do? They help people recognize that either the answers are already in you, or they're wildly accessible to you. And I'm nothing special. There's no reason why I have a monopoly on answers and good decision making. You can do this. And how do we convey that message to people? We use questions to pull the answers out of them.
I think this is personally one of the most impactful things for me since like coming on with Path for Growth, or maybe a little bit prior, but I don't remember exactly when I first heard this principle of, good leaders don't give answers, they extract. But it's so easy to take that and just immediately apply that to your interactions. And people talk a lot about, especially from a mid-level perspective, what it means to like lead up. And this is a great opportunity for someone who'd be in that situation of like, I have someone over me who comes to me with questions, or comes to me with seeking answers. And often like the best thing you can do in those situations is not tell them what to do, because sometimes that can throw off the dynamic. But if you just ask really, really good questions, you can often guide them to where they need to be, because they find the answers within themselves.
That's right. And the simplest form of this, which I don't want to degrade, certainly, because I do this a lot, and I think it can be incredibly valuable, but it can also be overused, is, what do you think we should do? Right? That's a simple form of it. But what can also be helpful is when people say, hey, I need to make this decision about what to do with this customer. I have to make a tough decision as it relates to my communication with this customer and what our relationship looks like going forward. What do I do in this situation? As a leader, you could say, well, what do you think you should do? Or you could say, well, tell me this. What does winning look like 60 days from now as it relates to this relationship? And maybe they start giving you some answers. Well, I think this would be true, and this would be true, and this would be true. And maybe you as a leader can jot those things down on the whiteboard. And then you could say, okay, so this is what winning looks like. Do you feel like we covered it? And they say, yeah, I think that's it. And then you could ask them, okay, well, what could you do right now that would move you one step towards the direction of what you defined winning looks like? Instead of just... Because sometimes they're saying, I don't have a decision-making process. And what you can do is instead of saying, oh, well, I'll just make the decision for you, you teach them how to fish. You say, okay, well, let's walk through a decision-making process together. And then great leaders will follow up on the back end of that process. And they'll saying, hey, you realize there's nothing super special we did in this conversation. I love having these conversations with you, but everything we just did at this whiteboard, you could absolutely do by yourself. And the reason why I know that is because you did it. I didn't have a single original thought this entire time. The other thing I would say as it relates to questions being a tool for leadership development is if you're going to do that, you have to believe that people are smart. You have to believe that they're smart, that they're capable. What we're not trying to do is like, I'm going to like share these guided questions that like gets them to stumble into the answer that I already have in my head. I think it's way better for you to actually say, I actually think you're really capable and you're really smart. And I actually think you might be better at making this decision than I am. And so I want to hear your thoughts on this.
Let's move on to the third arena.
Yeah, we already hit on it a little bit, but decision making. So what I wrote down here was a Peter Drucker quote. He said that the most serious mistakes are not made as a result of wrong answers, but because of asking the wrong questions. And I think that quote is directly related to the way we make decisions. Craig Rochelle says that the quality of your life will be determined by the quality of your decisions. If you are a leader, then you are a decision maker. And how do we make really, really great decisions? Not by having all the answers. The way that we make great decisions is by asking great questions. And again, we get shallow on this because we get into a leadership team meeting and, we've got a decision to make about the healthcare plan for our company, which could be, a couple $100,000 decision, if not a multi-million-dollar decision, depending on the size of the company. And what we often do is we get all these brilliant minds in the room. We say, healthcare is on the docket today for our IDS. We're going to talk about the healthcare plan. What should we do? And that's the question we ask. And we think we're being a good leader because we're asking a question. What should we do is the shallow question, and it's the last question. The questions we should be asking is, what do our people really value? What do other companies in our industry do, right? What are the downsides of each of these plans? What are the upsides of each of these plans? What information do we not have that if we did have it and we could have it, would help us make a better decision? Who should we be talking to make sure we move forward in a way that's really effective, right? Like those are all questions that we should be asking to make sure that the decision on the back end of our final conversation of what we should do is actually really quality. I think some of the greatest questions you can ask in decision making is information gathering questions. People often make bad decisions because they have inadequate or bad information. And you always have bad information or inadequate information because you didn't even think to ask the question. So what are all the questions you can ask just to basically shine light on everything that you can possibly know?
Before we dive into these 5 questions, you mentioned this at the very beginning, but asking good questions, both being rooted in and expanding people's capacity for creativity and like discovery. Let's break that down just a little bit more.
Yeah. The number of wildly successful businesses that were started in a garage or a basement is crazy, right? Bet you didn't think I was going there, right? But like Disney, Apple, Microsoft, Spotify, even Life Church, like all of these have their origin story in a garage or in a basement. And some people take that as being like, I am going to start in my basement because that's clearly the operating strategy. What's actually happening there? Well, what's happening there is when you start in a garage or a basement, what do you have to have if you're ever going to be successful and if you're ever going to get this thing off the ground? You have to not have resources. You clearly don't have resources. You've got to have resourcefulness. You got to be wildly and incredibly resourceful. And because they can get the thing off the ground in a garage, they can do basically anything. The principle there that applies to questions is constraints are the breeding ground for creativity. Just like the garage is a breeding ground for creativity because you're like, I don't have hardly anything right now. I've got to figure out how to do what I can with what I have. When you put a box around things, people become wildly creative. They find answers where they otherwise wouldn't. Here's how that applies to questions. Think about everything you could possibly think about right now. It's infinite. You can't actually even think about everything that you could possibly think about right now. But then the minute I ask you a question, like, tell me about a time when you were so excited that you couldn't help but take action. The minute I ask you that, what am I doing? I'm putting a box around all of the thoughts that you possibly could think, and that box is the equivalent of a garage. And I'm telling you, this is the box that you now get to operate in. You are literally, your brain, I picture the people from Inside Out scanning through all of your memories. They are running like crazy right now, trying to find the core memories that align with that question. What's crazy is you will come up with such a compelling answer. Questions are constraints, and constraints are the breeding ground for creativity. And so that's the philosophical why behind what we're about to share with people, which is 5 questions. If you take the time to ask yourself these questions or ask others these questions, you will get more creative and therefore better answers about your life and your leadership.
All of these questions have their own category attached to them. So state the category and then state the question.
Yeah, I like that you highlighted that. You know, some of these actually probably have multiple categories for them, but we'll share maybe the primary category. And these are not questions that I'm theorizing as like, I think if you ask this, it could be really helpful. These are all questions that have truly changed my life, right? Like these 5 questions have changed the way that I live actively today. And they're ones that I still lean on and use. And so the first category of question that I want to share with people is vision. Right? And the question associated with vision that I want us to remember and lean into is, what does winning look like? Something that is a tendency for a lot of people and a lot of leaders is that we become way more familiar with what we're against than what we're for. And the constraints that we operate in are what's the worst that could happen, what's currently going wrong, or what could go wrong. The minute we shift that mental dialogue to what does winning look like, well, then we are creating a constraint. And within that constraint, it's crazy. We'll start to pop off creative ideas of, well, here's what success would actually be. And that thought process can have massive ramifications.
I like that because it pivots the conversation into like, what is the outcome? What is the desired outcome? Like, it becomes an outcome-oriented discussion instead of task-oriented or one even, maybe just based off of fear of becoming something you don't want to be.
That I love that you hit home on that, because what that hits home on is it's a higher order question. What's a bad question as it relates to a strategic planning discussion or a leadership growth discussion or even a personal growth discussion? It's, what do we need to do? And that's the question that so many people either say or it's unwritten, but that's what they formulate their meeting around is, okay, everyone, what do we need to do? And we've got $500,000 of payroll in the room right now. And the question that we're asking is, what do we need to do? And we're basically making a list of firefighting activities. Yep. Conversely, the minute you ask, what does winning look like? You're not just saying like, what does our random task list suggest that we need to do and talk about today? Rather, you're saying, what is the outcome that if we were to achieve it, we would actually be satisfied, excited, of maximal service to other people? And then you work back from that. And then you ask, okay, in light of what winning looks like, what do we need to do?
Yeah, the first thing that came, that question popped into my head immediately, and then the first thing that came to mind when you asked that question is like, it's just reactive. That's a reactive question. You're
right.
responding to the world around you, and you're not actually leading. You're just reacting.
And this can apply to your marriage. It can apply to your vacations. Aspen and I, when we go on vacation, we will sit on the plane and we will say, what does winning look like when we're on the plane ride back? And it informs everything about the way we treat our vacation, right? It can also be really helpful in your head. If you're in an argument with someone, you can either actually bring this up, or you can do this mentally in your head, is like, what's the win here? Like, what are we actually trying to accomplish here? And man, if you can align on that, then you are way, way, way further down the line in terms of your disagreement than you would be if you just get embroiled or embattled in the tactics of the argument that you're in right now.
What's the next one?
So the next category is prioritizing. So we talked about vision. Now we're talking about prioritizing. This question is not original to me. And one thing that I would highlight there is, why do we get this idea that we need to come up with all of our own original questions? Some of my favorite questions that I ask, I have ripped from other people. And this one I ripped from Gary Keller and Jay Papasan, and credit to them. They wrote an entire book on this question, and the book is called The One Thing. It could have been called The One Question, because this is the question: what's the one thing that if I were to do it, it would make everything else easier or unnecessary? And what they would say is the answer to that question is the thing that you should give disproportionate time and energy to, always. And Gary Keller, I mean, if you don't know much about Gary Keller, he is the wildly successful CEO of Keller Williams Realty, like incredibly successful. What I love about Gary is how thoughtful he is. And it's no wonder he literally asks this question every day. What's the one thing that if I were to do it today, it would make everything else either easier or unnecessary? What's crazy is so often we don't know what to prioritize. Like, I have so much to do, I don't know what to do. And we end up doing a little bit of everything or a whole lot of nothing, one of those two options. What's crazy is if you actually have the humility to ask this question, you will find an answer, and it's typically pretty clear what the answer is. And then if you do that thing, I mean, you just create unstoppable momentum for everything else that's on that list.
What's an example of what this could look like? Because I feel like it'd be possible to hear that question and then in some context, maybe even be so overwhelmed, like, I don't even know how to answer that.
Yeah.
Like, can you give an example of what maybe that looked like for you?
I can give you this morning's example.
Perfect.
Right. So after I finish my writing this morning, it's like, I like to label, like, what are my big 3 things that I want to accomplish today outside of the already scheduled meetings and activities for the day. Right. And the prideful version of me says, Alex, you can do more than 3. And it's like, maybe I can. And if I can, then I'll get brownie points for those things. But for the purposes of the morning, I'm going to establish my big 3. And so I spent some time asking the question, like, well, what's the one thing that if I were to do it, it would make everything else in the coming day and in the coming week easier or unnecessary? And it's like super clear. We are in hiring mode right now, and we're also in a little bit of an organizational restructure right now. And it's super clear to me that, like, as it relates to decisions surrounding that organizational restructure, our leadership team is going to be involved in making those decisions. And the bottleneck around our leadership team having that conversation is me having some form of a proposal on here's the structure that I'm proposing that we can chop up, argue about, discuss, all of that, right? And so it's like, I need to spend some time getting that on paper. And if I do that, well, number one, we hire those people faster, which accelerates other people not being overloaded on our team or having extra work. It also brings clarity to my mind in terms of what's going to happen where. And there's so many things that are held up because of me that are now moving again, right? And so it's like super clear that that's the answer to that question. And so that's what I'm going to spend time on later today, is that exact question. That's an example of what that looks like.
Let's move on to the next one.
Yeah. So first question was question related to vision. Second question was related to prioritizing. The third question is related to crisis or abundance. And at first I wrote this down and I was like, the right time to ask this question is in crisis. But also this question that I'm going to give you, man, if you can become disciplined about asking this question in abundance, holy cow, you are going to crush it. And so here's the question. It's super simple. What does this make possible? Let's start with crisis. Crisis will either crush you or it will recreate you. And I believe that's woven into the biblical narrative through the powerful word of redemption, right? That the worst thing that could ever happen in the history of the universe did, and it was redeemed to be the greatest thing that could ever happen in the history of the universe. That is the narrative template that our world operates in. I believe that. And as a result, every crisis that I experience, there's no way it's going to be as bad as that thing. And every crisis has the seeds of redemption in it. There's glory, there's goodness, there's grace in it. And everything works together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purposes, right? If you actually believe that, then you know when you're facing trial, when you're facing tribulation, when you're facing challenge, what you can say is, God has something in this. And if I can get in on what God is doing, I can be participatory in seeing this redeemed for his glory and for others' good. And so the way I capture all of that theology into a question is when you face crisis, you got to be disciplined because you won't feel this oftentimes. You got to be disciplined about asking the question, what does this actually make possible?
Because what do people typically ask in crisis? Why? Why is this happening to me?
Or what are we going to do?
Yeah. And
that's so true. And why is almost a whining statement.
Exactly. Yep.
That's Job. That's kind of like what Job's bad friends were asking, were telling him to start asking is why.
Yeah. Whereas like this, again, like it pivots your posture into everything I am given is either, a gift or there's suffering as well. But like all of those things based on what God says in his word will be redeemed, and God wastes nothing. And so that it shifts your perspective into like, how is God working in this? Where are the areas that he has the opportunity to redeem this? And maybe if you can't even see it, like, again, in some way, it does put constraints around, like suffering puts constraints around your life in a way that it's like, oh yeah, I have to create, I have to innovate, I have to move in a way that I haven't been previously. And
that's so good.
I just love the posture shift that question takes in contrast to, I think, what people typically ask.
Mm-hmm. And let's be very clear. I have been to my fair share of self-improvement, leadership, and business growth conferences that may or may not align with what is now my theology, right? It can be really easy to subscribe to a shallow version of what we're talking about here that is like everything bad that happens is going to result in you being financially wealthy eventually. And it's like that is a false gospel. That is not true, right? Sometimes you may not materially or physically see the affliction or struggle you are going through redeemed. But if your aim is the glory of God, then maybe that is the redemption, right? So you will, at the end of all things, see it redeemed. But maybe you might not be healed from the affliction. Your relationship with that team member that left might stay really, really bad. But maybe the testimony that's meant to come out of that becomes redemption is people see when that person goes through tough, difficult, unexplainable, sometimes tragic things, they don't just have them go away to be able to be joyful or to be able to be faithful. Rather, they are able to be faithful in and through that. And that is redemption. That is a good result. Sometimes we see it materially redeemed, but other times it's like, it's just, man, the way that you respond to tragedy with such grace is in itself the testimony and therefore the redemption. And then we probably don't have time to get into all of this, but people can probably pretty naturally see how that applies to abundance as well. So often when we are in seasons of abundance, basically we stop asking questions altogether and we say, okay, I did all this, so now I can coast. And now we've put a lid, and that's the exact opposite type of constraint that you want to put on your growth and your ability to serve others, it's great to ask a good question. What does this now make possible? Mm-hmm. And we could record an entire episode on that, but it would probably be better to get to the fourth question.
Yeah. So the fourth category is decision-making and development. The question you put is, what would a wise leader do?
Yeah. It's so funny. Whenever I'm struggling with a really, really difficult decision, sometimes it's about like communication to a team member or a customer, especially when it's an emotionally charged situation, right? I had someone, this was a couple of years ago now, send me an email, which email probably isn't the best way to do this, but send me an email with most of our team CC'd with a list of ways that I had apparently ethically wronged him.
This was a team member?
This was not a team member.
Okay.
No, yeah, I haven't told you this story. So interesting format to share this for the first time. No, this was a customer, right? And he was very emotionally charged, right? I would prefer a person like that give me a phone call so we can talk about that. But he was very emotionally charged. And immediately I'm reading this email. What do? I start to get emotionally charged. One of the things that was really helpful is before I type anything on hell's keyboard, I sit back, take a deep breath and say, in this situation, what would a wise leader do? That is a constraint that in the presence of that constraint, I'm now forced to consider the fact that whatever playbook a wise leader might do, I'm about to not do. Right? Like, so I better be really careful here right now. And then think about what would a wise leader do? And like, well, a wise leader would seriously examine their own motives and look, is there merit and truth to anything he's saying? Or rather, what merit or truth is there to what he's saying? Because I know I'm not perfect. There's things that I've done wrong every single day, right? And so maybe in all of his 20 points that he listed, maybe there's 5 points of truth in there that I need to own, and I should do that. And then on the back end of that, what would a wise leader do? Well, a wise leader would not respond to an inappropriate medium in an inappropriate medium, right? I'm not going to say like, I can't believe this person sent this via email. I'm going to send an email back that's equally obtrusive with more people CC'd, right? No, I'm going to make a phone call. What would a wise leader do? A wise leader would write down the things that they believe are true beforehand so that they have that written piece of paper to reference in the conversation, and they're not speaking out of emotion. They're speaking out of rationale and logic, right? All of that series of questions came from one question, and it was, what would a wise leader do? And so really helpful for personal decision-making and personal action. Also helpful for developing others. We talked about questions as a leadership development tool. It's a great question to ask is like, if someone comes to you with a decision that they need to make or a problem that they need to solve or a customer issue or an issue that they're having with another team member on the team, you can ask them, what would a wise leader, you're kind of telling them you're not being very wise right now, right? But you could ask them, hey, just put yourself in the position, what would a wise leader do in this situation? And what's crazy is if you ask that question, people will give you answers. And then you can say, well, maybe you should do that.
Let's move on to the last one, which is in self-reflection.
Yeah.
What's that question? And then can you break it down?
Yeah, this is one that I recognized as a really powerful self-reflection question in the past year. I don't honestly even remember how I stumbled across this, but basically I found a ton of value in asking, what would the average person who is in my life stage be struggling with right now? And what's crazy is I can answer that question pretty easily. Like, I'm a new father. I'm a fairly new husband. I'm a business owner. I'm in my mid-30s. What is that person going to struggle with? That average guy is going to struggle with prioritizing his marriage. He's going to struggle with not just getting quality time with his kiddo, but quantity time with his kiddo. He's going to struggle to be fully present at work whenever he's supposed to be working. He's probably really going to struggle with like temporal distractions like social media. A lot of guys in their mid-30s, once they have a kid and a wife, really struggle with their weight, and they struggle to maintain physical activity. A lot of guys that age start to become socially isolated from other men, right? I've got a whole list of things that average men at my life stage struggle with. So then the follow-up question, where am I most susceptible to being remarkably average? I have to recognize that there is really nothing outside of prayerful, faithful, intentional decision-making that makes me anything more than average. Right. And so, like, left to my own abilities and devices, I am so average. And I believe that. Right. And so it's like, if I'm not going to be those things, it's going to be because I made decisions that were based in character of who God is and then who I want to be, that resulted in habits, rhythms, and actions that then inform the person I was going to be. Doesn't just apply to me, though. You can look at someone, age 63, what would someone that is age 63, their kids are out of the house, their business has grown to where it doesn't fully need them anymore, what would that person struggle with? Complacency, laziness, lack of vision, micromanaging just to create work because they don't feel needed anymore, right? Social disconnection, lack of vision for the future of their life. Right? That's 6 things that person would struggle with. And then you just get to ask yourself the question, like, left to my own devices, I will be remarkably average. So what does 63-year-old me want to do? It's so helpful.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, I don't love it. It's like dadgummit, like, where am I being average right now? But it's like, I want to be different than average. So it's helpful just to think about, well, what is average?
Yeah.
And it's all, we often think about, like, our challenges and our struggles are so specific and unique, and it's like, nah, all 30-year-old guys struggle with most of the same things.
Yeah.
And it's actually really helpful to depersonalize it a little bit.
Well, I think that's often the biggest lie leaders tell themselves, is that, like, they're alone, it's on them, right? And,
yes.
And then they self-isolate and they hunker down. It's like, more than likely, everyone around you and your peers are probably going through very similar things or have recently. And, like, there's a lot of strength in asking for help and just acknowledging, like, putting the mirror up, right? And just acknowledging, like, yeah, these are the areas in this current season that I may be failing, or that I need to just be putting constraints or borders or accountability around so that I can just be operating wisely.
Exactly. Yeah.
What's a challenge that you have for people as we close this episode out?
I'd say choose one of the questions, one of the 5, maybe go back to it in the episode. And how about let's plan to also list the 5 questions in the show notes, but choose one of the 5 and ask it to yourself or someone else, and just spend some time giving genuine thought to the answer. Alfred North Whitehead, he famously said, the purpose of thinking is so that our thoughts die instead of us. And it's crazy. You have this mind that can generate ideas and possible futures and potential realities. And then you can actually think about, like, is that good or is that bad? And if it's a bad thing, you don't do it. And if it's a good thing, you do more of it, right? We oftentimes just don't think. And thinking always starts with great questions. So just start asking.
Thanks, Alex.
Thanks, Ben. Hey, y'all, thanks so much for watching. If you want more content like this, we've got some killer stuff planned. So make sure you rate, review, and subscribe. Let's go, let's go, let's go.